All right. Take two. First rule of this channel: we do not talk about the channel. Second rule of this channel: this is not legal advice. So, a couple things. I moved Isaiah Pacheco up to 8 because of the CEH signing, and I also moved James Cook up to 9 because of the Stephon Diggs trade. That also moves Zamir White to 10. And again, all these things are going to be fluid. That's why I have Mike Tyson up in his immortal words. Everybody's got a plan until the draft starts. So, moving on from that, we're going to get into the wide receiver rankings heading into the pre drafts. This is going to be like really fluid, especially with all these guys that are going to go in some of these spots, these rookies. This is a really deep wide receiver class. It's more of a pick your poison, like what you want, what you like, what skill set you want the guy to do, and a landing spot's going to mean a lot. And I'll get into that a little bit. So, uh, I've already gone over some of these guys, so I'm not going to go into it a lot. CD Lamb, wide receiver one, that's what he finished as last year. Lack of a competition for targets, as long as Dak's back, it's probably going to be too easy to at least expect him to finish in the same range he did last year. I have Garrett Wilson all the way up here at number 2. Again, I think there's a little bit of a lack of a competition of targets. The biggest thing I don't like ranking guys up at the edge of their expected range of outcomes. But again, in this case, like I just think this is where he's going to end up at the end of the year, and this is where I would take him. And we are going to be comparing, other rankings to see like where they have guys. So like Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 7, I would have him wide receiver 2. There's a certain amount of splitting hairs there. I have Puka number 2, expecting that Cooper Kupp falls because of the age and lack of competition of targets at that point. He had 160 as a rookie. The expectation is like he can only go a little bit further from wide receiver 4. If he does step back, he's still going to be a top 10 guy. So I think it's relatively safe taking him with wide receiver 3, and that's not even where he's being ranked at. Ja'Marr Chase is the guy we just moved up, talking about age and competition of targets. I don't like guys like Ja'Marr Chase because, with T. Higgins, probably going to be a little bit of cannibalization of opportunity, but that's okay. He's very talented, attached to a good quarterback. Sometimes you just got to bet on the talent. I do think maybe he has a cap ceiling relative to everybody else, but like he's gonna finish in that range of wide receiver 4 if he stays healthy. Tyreek Hill, moving him down because of the age apex. Actually could end up moving him down a little bit more as we get through the post draft into training camp. All right, moving on. Wide receiver 6, Devontae Adams, and the same thing, like moving him down because of age. He only finished as wide receiver 11 last year, hoping that Gardner Minshew is the quarterback, even if it's Aiden O'Connell. Aiden O'Connell, we could go with that like hypothetical takes a step forward thing. Devontae Adams' game is really not going to be hampered as much by age. He is more of a technician. He is kind of a bully, and those are good things to help uh, the production stay up, even with the decline with age. I have Justin Jefferson at 7. I will talk a little bit more about this when we get to Jordan Addison, but for the most part, new quarterback Sam Darnold, a lot of competition for opportunity. That's where I would have him where he's at. No knock on the talent. It's just the situation, and I would factor that in with range of outcomes. If he's wide receiver 7 and he finishes at wide receiver 1, I can expect that. But if he's, how should I put this? If there's enough competition for targets and he finishes down with down statistically, especially hurting the guy who drafts him going into the playoffs, none of that would surprise me. And then we have Amon Ra going at wide receiver 8. He finished last year at wide receiver 3. A lot of competition for opportunity in a good offense. He's got a limited athletic skill set. But overall, I think he is relatively safe at his position if you're in a drafting safety. And then right now, expecting that there's a possibility that Rashee Rice gets moved down because of law enforcement stuff, but otherwise, like wide receiver 9, expecting that Travis Kelce takes a step back, attached to Patrick Mahomes. So wide receiver 9, and then the expectation is he's going to average about 10 targets a game, and that's what happens when he basically became a full-time starter later in the season. Michael Pittman finishes this off at wide receiver 10. I have this here when we look at wide receiver salaries. He signed a contract in the offseason. He's wide receiver 8. It's a little misleading when we come to trying to like apples to apples wide receiver contracts. But overall, they are expecting him to be a wide receiver 1. Drafting him to be a wide receiver 1 with that little bit of wiggle room. He could finish as wide receiver 1 overall. He could fall into just being a high end 2. But again, wide receiver 10 puts him in the middle of that range of outcomes. And that's kind of what these rankings are relative to where everybody else puts them. All right, moving on. AJ Brown. This is another one that like I don't like because of the cannibalization of targets. We'll talk a little bit more about him when we get to Devontae Smith. But overall, like probably a cap ceiling with AJ Brown, even as good as he is overall. Just the offense is not good, and he's going to be battling for opportunity. And again, like I pointed out, like if you think AJ Brown's going to be the wide receiver 1, then you better be moving Saquon down your board. Drake London at wide receiver 12. And this is going to be right in the middle where I think his range of outcomes is like expecting that massive spike because of Kirk Cousins. It's probably not a bad idea, but at the same time, like hedging the bets that he just doesn't take that step. Like not everybody's going to move forward. Not all the offenses that we think are going to be good are going to end up being good. And not all the offenses that we thought were going to be bad are going to be bad. So in the case of like Drake London, putting him right in the middle of wide receiver 12. I have underdog up, and I can't really show you underdog because, I don't want to give off my personal information, but underdog has Drake London as wide receiver 10 going with an ADP of 17. So again, I don't think he's too overranked here. The guy that I thought was interesting when I was ranking these guys is Chris Olave. Lack of a competition of opportunities going on in New Orleans, expecting that Alvin Kamara one way or another is not going to be a thing at his age, and the decline that he had really is going to be the number 1 overall guy in the offense. Maybe there's a chance that Kendre Miller moves forward. There's always going to be the opportunity. I think that Chris Olave, there's going to be seasons where he's going to finish as a top 10 guy. You kind of have to bet like what years he's going to do it. There's a limited skill set to him. I'll talk a little bit more about Chris Olave when I talk about some of the wide rookies. He is going to be capped from an opportunity standpoint because of his skill set. He doesn't do well with press. He doesn't do well with physical coverage. That's why his upside will probably be capped. But like, he's going to have the year where those touchdowns regress positively and those air yards hit, and it's just a matter of like what year it's going to happen. So I was a little surprised. Like betting the under on Olave is probably not as smart as betting the mean, and that's where I would put him here. Jalen Waddle moving him up to wide receiver 14, and that's again based off the fact that if he's going, or if Tyreek Hill has to have or is probably going to have an age-related decline, there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction. Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 14, bouncing back from that wide receiver 34 disappointment. That's where I put him. DJ Moore, this was a guy that I thought was going to be a little bit higher, but the unknown variable of what we're assuming is going to be Caleb Williams and then Keenan Allen. And then also you're going to have the competition for opportunity with Cole Kmet and maybe DeAndre Swift. Like it's probably a little too rich to move him up any higher. I do think he's got wide receiver 1 range of outcomes. I also think that he has a little bit of a chance to disappoint relative to drafting him too high based off of all that, all those variables. And again, he finished as wide receiver 6 last year. So this would be under ranking him. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 16, same type of thought process of Chris Olave. Like it's there. He finished wide receiver 6, 2020. Again, we can't control injuries. We can't control how wide receivers are going to be used across the league. Going to have that opportunity to flirt with double-digit touchdowns, and he can take over a game at any time. So again, like guys like him and Olave are probably safer plays than they are going to be upside plays. And one of the things between like the last couple of days I've been doing with guys like Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell is I've been moving them all over the place, trying to get an idea for where I think they're at. I think the safest guy out of all these guys right now, and this is only going to be wide receiver 17, is Nico, because like in 15 games, this stat line, 109 targets, 80 receptions, like almost 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns. I think that's relatively safe. He finished wide receiver 9 last year, and I just don't expect like very much change to this because his skill set is going to be so different than Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. So like right there, I don't think there's going to be a lot of change in how he plays. He's going to be probably the guy who's the beneficiary of the other guys, getting coverage taken away, and then he's just going to get what he gets, and they're going to be the guys that are probably going to get the lack of opportunity based off of Nico getting fed because of that size that he has. And then I have Brandon Ayuk and Debo right next to each other. Again, they're going to cannibalize each other. There's only going to be so much extra opportunity that's going to go on within that offense. Brandon Ayuk, I would have a little higher because potentially he's a better wide receiver than Debo. He is younger, and that would lead me to think that like if there is a spike year, it would go to Brandon Ayuk, as opposed to Debo Samuels, and you're chasing those touchdowns and you're chasing those rushing upside touchdowns in particular. He's getting a little older. I've some of the guys have said that he's lost a step. I'm not quite as concerned with that. That's not necessarily his game. He's not a bad wide receiver, but again, like the capped opportunity overall in this offense, probably not going to get outside of that range. Finished wide receiver 12 last year. Could disappoint, fall into that wide receiver 3 range, could move up a little bit more and flirt with wide receiver 12, and that was basically off of those touchdowns. Mike Evans expecting that like age related decline, but he did finish his wide receiver 5 last year. A lot of that on splash plays, a lot of that on touchdowns. Did sign that contract, and I have that pulled up here with good old Mike Evans averaging $20 million a year at 31. So that's not like a bad thing. I would still be betting the decline on Mike Williams, but again, like somewhere between like maybe a little disappointing wide receiver 3, upside wide receiver 3, and maybe he can get back, to probably not going to be wide receiver 1, but like could get close to it with Baker May coming back. Moving on to Devonta Smith. And this is another one that I think there's a lot of upside to him, and it's really just depending on like there could be a year if he stays with Philadelphia, who knows? But this could be the year that you see the flop with Devonta Smith and AJ Brown. And again, that's not on AJ Brown's talent or anything. It's just like the cookie could crumble a particular way, and Devonta Smith, being I'll be nice and just say like maybe a slightly better football player than AJ Brown is. Could be the year that flop occurs, but overall, like being the number 2 attached to Philadelphia is probably not necessarily a bad thing. It's spot on, almost spot on where he finished as wide receiver 20 last year. So again, like again, it's trying to put him in the middle of their range of outcomes. Cooper Kupp, like this one is one I really struggled on. Age-related decline probably incoming when he's going to be 31. Maybe decline in efficiency last year. Probably caps his overall ceiling. Does have the ability to flirt with a top 10 wide receiver. I think it's still at his age, like these technicians are going to be a little bit harder to rank appropriately because they can win without their athleticism. We'll get to Keenan Allen here in a second. So I could definitely see him getting back up there. I think the bigger problem is going to be with the Rams is Puka Nacua. Like he's not going to have those age-related problems, and that's probably going to be more of the reason why Cooper Kupp is not going to be as reliable, and probably going to be capped on both sides of where his productions are going to be. And the same thing with T. Higgins. Like he's playing with Jamar Chase, different skill set, probably not going to have the upside. Maybe slightly could get into that wide receiver 2 range. Probably not going to be flirting with wide receiver 1 at all. So like keeping him down here, if you do pull the trigger, and this was what I'm looking at, wide receiver 23. If you do pull the trigger on T. Higgins at wide receiver 23, his ability to break your heart is going to be lower, and his ability to potentially win you a league as a high end wide receiver 2 is built in. And I said we're going to talk a lot more about Justin Jefferson when we get to Jordan Addison. So remember, like literally, and hopefully you hear that car with the bass. Literally, the Vikings came out and said they drafted Jordan Addison to make teams pay for double teaming Justin Jefferson, for taking Justin Jefferson away. And with all the quarterback problems last year, and remember that Jordan Addison didn't really become a full-time player until like mid-season. So with all that went on, Jordan Addison finished the year last year a wide receiver 21. 108 targets, 70 receptions, 911 yards, 10 touchdowns. They're probably not going to have TJ Hockenson to start the year. And there's a better chance that Jordan Addison is either this top end Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith, or he cannibalizes Justin Jefferson's ceiling than there is that Jordan Addison disappoints at his ADP. So when I go hunt down a guy like Jordan Addison I'm looking at Underdog right now. I like to surprise myself. I don't even see Jordan Addison's going as wide receiver. He's going at 69 overall on Underdog, and then on Fantasy Pros. Let's see where we can find Jordan Addison. I don't even see him. Drake, he can't be below Drake London. Jordan Addison, wide receiver 34. And that's just like, that's ridiculous to me to think that he's going to finish outside of like wide receiver 20, in the wide receiver 20s if he stays healthy. Maybe the downside of this is, again, Sam Darnold. That would be the question mark. Maybe. But I have Deontay Johnson here expecting that he's going to get attached to Bryce Young. Bryce Young's going to be one of those offenses that maybe everybody's going to be expecting to be not good, and they may not be not bad. And then back to those targets, like 140 to 160 targets is something that we could look at with Deontay Johnson going at wide receiver 25. Stephon Diggs, this was rough. I had him moved into wide receiver 3 range. I think this is like the low end wide receiver 2s. Remember, it like even if you're in like a 14-man league, it doesn't mean there's 14 wide receiver 1s. It doesn't mean that there's like 14 wide receiver 2s. It's more on point distribution. So moving Stephon Diggs into this role at wide receiver 26, he turns 31 in November. I do think there's going to be an age-related decline. I think that what they're going to ask him to do in Houston is not to do special athletic things. It's going to be to do the technician things that he does well, and that's going to cap his upside. So I could definitely see he's going to fall between 800 and 1,000 yards, and then the touchdowns are going to be like really difficult to guess on based off if he's going to be the guy that they look for in the red zone versus some even theoretically Joe Mixon being the guy that they're going to give it to when they get down there. So like that would be maybe you can guess like 10 touchdowns, probably going to be closer to like 6 or 7 on the year based off of usage. The guy that I would be guessing that they're going to get used to get a lot of first downs is going to be Stephon Diggs. Going to keep his ADOT low. His yards per reception is going to be low. A lot of first downs. And that's why I would put him right next to Keenan Allen, because they're probably going to be used in very similar ways overall. I would move Keenan Allen down, under Stephon Diggs, because like Diggs is going to have CJ Stroud. We've already seen CJ Stroud in the NFL projecting that it's going to be Caleb Williams, and Caleb Williams is good. Maybe not something I'm going to do, but like is going to have a lot more upside based off of wide receiver 27, just because again, he's going to be that technician, going to get a lot of targets, going to have more value probably in PPR leagues than standard leagues. And again, moving Zay Flowers down all the way down here could end up being the number one in the offense. It may not be Mark Andrews' year, but that's still going to leave a lot to guess on based off of the offense, not necessarily like a pass-heavy, pass-friendly offense. Expecting him to take that step forward in year 2 also could disappoint into that wide receiver 3 land. So again, like wide receiver 28, probably not a bad place to put him. Khalil Shakur jumps all the way up. He's projected right now to be the number 1 wide receiver attached to Josh Allen. So again, with finishing as a wide receiver 2 as a range of outcomes is probably not going to be surprising. I would still suspect that like Dalton Kincaid is going to be the number 1 in this offense. That's why I've moved Dalton Kincaid all the way up to wide receiver 1. But again, crossing your fingers that you get like Stephon Diggs type production from Khalil Shakur is not going to be something that I think anybody should laugh at anybody about thinking. The other thing with Khalil Shakur is it's going to be what the Buffalo Bills do in the draft. And again, talking about the skill set of the guy that they bring in, they have Matt Collins and they have Curtis Samuel and Dalton Kincaid. Those would probably be the top pass catchers. Dawson Knox is still going to be there. If they bring in a big body guy to Buffalo, which I think we could expect, Matt Collins could maybe play that role. This would maybe open up Khalil Shakur to do those things. It wouldn't necessarily hurt him, if they bring in like a Gabe Davis type of guy. But if they bring in a Stephon Diggs type of guy, it would probably move Khalil Shakur down. But right now, like he would be one of those sneaky guys that I would be looking at trying to pick up. I don't know if anybody is really tracking like Khalil Shakur is wide receiver 61 overall on Fantasy Pros. And again, I don't know, like updated April 6th, so that's today, I guess. I would expect him to be quite higher because this would be a guy that I'd be throwing a dart at to try and get like a return. And I'm sure like he might get hype trained up as the offseason goes on. Like Calvin Ridley, again, the difference between Khalil Shakur and Calvin Ridley, their situations are maybe Will Levis is okay to good at football. New head coach, but on the other hand, like we have a track record of Josh Allen being, a gunslinger and good at football. So if I have to pick between the two of them, I'm going to throw my dart at Khalil Shakur being a league winner versus Calvin Ridley. But I still think Calvin Ridley has that range of outcomes to finish something like he did in 2020. And there were points last year with Jacksonville where he did look like he was the guy to win a league. There are other their coaching spots. It may not entirely be that Calvin Ridley's lost a step. He is 29. But again, like you're trying to find guys that win leagues. There is tea leaves that say he's the guy. Moving on, I did have to drop George Pickens down. Mostly this is because like who knows what the quarterback situation is going to be like. Right now, competition for targets is probably going to be like Pat Freiermuth. Probably have to expect that they bring somebody else in to complement George Pickens. If depending on who that guy is, a smaller guy, probably going to cap the opportunities. He has to be super efficient. They bring in another big body guy, then that might say that they're going to try and move George Pickens around and open him up. So that's going to be something to look at. And again, like Russ may not be good at football anymore. The better guy to help George Pickens out may be Justin Fields. I don't know if that's like necessarily an upgrade at that point. I have Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy together. And this is kind of just how I look at drafts. So if you don't like it, like sorry for partying, but Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy are wide receiver, like combine their wide receiver 32. My thought process behind this is Amari Cooper should be over the age apex this year. They paid Jerry Jeudy like low end or okay wide receiver 2 money to pull up where he is. I think he's like $17.5 million wide receiver 20 overall. So like remember the idea behind this is this Christian Kirk contract is what we're kind of basing things on. That changed that in the Tyreek Hill contract kind of changed the game a little bit. So there is the expectation that maybe they're expecting Jerry Jeudy to be their number one down the line. And with the age flop with Amari Cooper, it could be the year right now. And again, this is based off of pricing. And with Jerry Jeudy, I think I was looking him up a little bit earlier. Wide receiver 52, it basically costs me nothing to find out. So if I'm going to hedge my bet, this would be one of those things where like, talking about like wide receiver handcuffing, I would be wanting to put my money on Jerry Jeudy versus Amari Cooper. But if I'm really risk averse, then I'm just going to take them both together. And I can guarantee I can get both of them in a draft pretty easily. But I would prefer Jerry Jeudy over Amari Cooper this year because of the age. It has nothing to do with talent. I don't care about talent. The only thing that really bothers me about these guys, why I have them end up meeting together at the same spot, is because like who knows if Deshaun Watson is good at football, and that's probably going to be the thing that scares me more than anything else. And honestly, on top of all of this, is the guy that I think could end up running away with the offense as the number one receiver is David Njoku. Chris Godwin here. This would be like wide receiver 33. Maybe PPR guy. Maybe he could flop with Mike Williams because of the age of Mike Williams. Maybe that could happen. Probably a little nicked up because of injuries. Baker Mayfield, the quarterback, has a little bit of flexibility to go back up in the wide receiver 2 land. I don't think he's ever going to be that wide receiver 2 overall that he was in 2019. Partly because I just don't think the touchdowns are going to be there again. The other thing to look at is like, those injuries, trying to guess that he's going to be able to not disappoint, like that's going to be something hard to look at. And then falling outside of the 30s, like would be something that I could definitely see occurring. Terry McLaurin, all the talent in the world, bad quarterback play. Maybe we'll revisit this with Drake May coming in, having to move Terry McLaurin up. Remember, any number one in any offense, any wide receiver one in any offense has fantasy draft value. And this is just like the lowest I can get the highest I can get Terry McLaurin realistically based off of the fact that like this organization is bad. Jackson Smith and the Jigma, I moved up to wide receiver 35. Tyler Lockett, we'll talk about a little bit later. I think Tyler Lockett, I have written down, he's 32 this year, expecting that flop overall in opportunity. Probably going to be more of a PPR monster. I keep forgetting the old wide receiver that's no longer in the league that was just that PPR guy. So yeah, like 100 catches, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, probably going to be something that you could shake a stick at going at wide receiver 35. Maybe the biggest 2 things I would look at, or there's 3 things I would look at with Jackson Smith, keeping him this low. Actually, DK is going to be the number 1. Geno Smith is probably not good nor bad at football, and then Noah Fant might end up moving up the pecking order with the Seahawks that someone will talk about with tight ends. And then on top of that, like you have Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, vulturing touchdown work, which is something that you need. So like there's a lot of stuff to keep him lower, but like I do like the talent. I do like the situation. It's just not the greatest in the world. Moving on to wide receiver, what I have now, 36, Christian Watson. Again, I talked about this. 23 games, and there's like 12 receiving touchdowns. I think he's got a couple other rushing touchdowns. It's just staying healthy, going to be that boom bust guy. Good what projects to be a good offense, pieces of good offenses. This is probably the highest upside guy out of them all. We'll talk about a few other guys later. That's why I would have him here. Again, trying to guess like who's the number 1 on the offense, Christian Watson, and then you're getting him at wide receiver 36. Hollywood Brown, wide receiver 37. The probably number 3 option attached to Patrick Mahomes, and he's going to be the vertical guy. Maybe you're looking at wide receiver 24. That's what he did in Baltimore in 2021. And, again, at wide receiver 37, Tank Dell, this is his, like, moved him all over the place. I think he's going to have a very capped ceiling, and he's going to be a very boom bust. But again, like wide receiver 38, and he's very close probably in usage overall to how Marquise Brown is going to end up being used with the Chiefs. So I think like very similar ranges of outcomes and production for the season. DeAndre Hopkins, again, over the age apex. Who knows what Will Levis is going to be like? Who knows what the offense is going to be like? Probably projects to be the number 2 in that offense. Maybe again, like maybe you can get him up to 100 receptions. Probably going to be closer to this stat line again. 2023 over under on 37 targets, 75 receptions, 1,000 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns. I'd probably bet the under because of age, but again, he still finishes wide receiver 22 and being ranked as wide receiver 38. Courtland Sutton, who knows what's going to go on with the Broncos this year, but again, like he would project to be the number 1, and just throwing a dart at the number 1 in an offense is probably not a bad idea. Did have a ridiculous 10 touchdowns on a very bad offense. So again, like there's upside to it. That's why I would have him ranked this high as wide receiver 40. And now we're just like getting into like the really deep dart throws. I have Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston ranked together. This is going to change probably based off of what camp hype is between these 2 guys. I will talk a little bit about the wide receivers here and the rookies here in a second with Malik Neighbors. I was thinking that teams tend to not like these smaller receivers earlier in the draft, but now like after I was like looking at this, both Josh Palmer 6'1", 210 and Quentin Johnston 6'4", 215, like they can work the outsides, they can keep Malik Neighbors clean, and he can do the things that he's really good at. So now like I went from thinking that they might go Rome at 5. Now I'm thinking they're going to go Neighbors at 6 or at 5. The Chargers are. If Neighbors goes to the Chargers, I think like I could even think of putting him at like wide receiver 8 overall, going into the drafts. Like that would be really good. Maybe the downside is the Jim Harbaugh offense, but overall, I think there's a better range of outcomes for Neighbors if he goes to the Chargers, and that would move these guys probably like further down the board, because this is based off the chance that one of them is the number 1 attached to Justin Herbert. I've already talked about Michael Wilson, 3rd round pick, probably going to be the number 3 and probably not the highest passing volume offense, but again, still the chance that he ends up being the number 1 there based off of the second year jump and he's the number one overall in the offense. So like attached to like an okay quarterback in Kyler Murray. So I would have him here. Once Marvin Harrison gets drafted, I don't think this necessarily changes his range of outcomes. As much as I like Marvin Harrison, overall, like we expecting him at wide receiver. What I have my wide receiver 42, and to finish the season as wide receiver 42 when he finished like wide receiver 60 and half point PPR it's not a stretch. So I put Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk, and Zay Jones together. Your guess is as good as mine. Remember, Gabe Davis is going to be making $13 million a year. So like that's like low end wide receiver 2 money. And then you're trying to guess who's going to be the number one attached to this offense. I would actually guess at this point, like Evan Ingram. I would probably end up moving Evan Ingram way up the list, but there's still a chance it's going to be Gabe Davis. I could also see Christian Kirk being in that vertical slot role and then jumping back up to something like wide receiver 11, like he did in 2022, 133 targets, 84 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Definitely within his range of outcomes, maybe even a little bit more out of that. And then Zay Jones is another guy that they paid. So maybe he's back up to 121 targets like he did in 2022 or better. So like your guess is as good as mine. And I would lump all these guys together. If you're in a particular league, especially like Superflex with Trevor Lawrence, stacking maybe even all three of these guys if you have deep enough bench, I don't know. I would probably guess Gabe Davis is the guy that you're going to give the first crack to. Christian Kirk is probably going to be the highest upside, safest play, and then Zay Jones is going to be the cheapest out of the group. Again, other guys to look at, Jalen Hyatt right now, he's going to project to maybe be the number one in that Giants offense. If it's not Darren Waller, we'll talk a little bit more about these wide receivers here when I get to the end and I talk about the rookies. And then to finish off this tier, I think this is wide receiver 45 for me. It's Curtis Samuel. Remember, he's going to probably score a couple rushing touchdowns on the year. And on top of that, like the vacated targets from Stephon Diggs, it's very unlikely that he ends up being the number one in Buffalo attached to Josh Allen. That's still within his range of outcomes. Has finished relatively in this range on a few of his seasons, 48, 36, 25, 35, 44. I have him ranked right now wide receiver 45 going into a draft. This is not a stretch. Then moving on to this, like the Packers wide receivers are going to be a mess all offseason. Hopefully there's some trades that go on with that. We're going to be tracking a lot of stuff. So I have Jaden Reed and Romeo Doubs together as wide receiver 46. Remember, Romeo Doubs like blew up in the playoffs. He may end up being the safest play out of all these guys relative to his cost. Jaden Reed, they were using him in the red zone. Romeo Doubs is attached to the red zone. Jordan Love. Like I probably would be shying away from all these wide receivers. We're going to even talk about more Packers wide receivers here in a second, but there is value to these guys, especially in deeper leagues, trying to guess that dart throw. I'm going to guess maybe Romeo Doubs is probably the guy to own out of the bunch, especially versus cost. But like, who knows if we can't get a trade? Jameson Williams here. I think what I have Jameson Williams, wide receiver 47, attached to this good Detroit offense. Like really realistically could see him hitting like 11, 10, 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards, 10 touchdowns. It's going to be heavily based off that luck, but he, has the opportunity, the draft position, good offense. He just has to be able to return a high efficiency play. Could happen all the way down there at wide receiver 47. Rashid Shaheed and A.T. Perry. This is something I'm going to be monitoring in the offseason. Who's going to end up being the wide receiver 2 in this offense? Potentially could end up moving up there into like top 20 upside. A.T. Perry is going to be the big body guy going into the end zone. 2 touchdowns to finish the season off. Rahisha, he's going to be the efficiency guy. Like you got to be in deeper leagues to be taking these dart throws at like wide receiver 50 in drafts or best ball to be hitting on the return on the investment in these guys. And then I've talked about Trey Palmer in the other video where you get the age-related decline of Mike Evans. Chris Godwin's nicked up at his age at 28. Trey Palmer, 3rd-round draft pick, moves up and takes over. Could get wide receiver 2 investment or return on investment based off this guy, and I have him at wide receiver 49. And then finally to finish off at wide receiver 50, Trey Tucker. Man, this is going to be a long road because like age-related decline of Devontae Adams, better quarterback play with, say, Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell. Mike Mayer doesn't take the step forward, and Jacoby Myers is going to be capped, and Trey Tucker is going to be the guy that steps up. And again, you're looking at like 1,000 to 1,100 yard season, flirting with 10 touchdowns out of that like vertical slot type of play. Again, like finish the season 5 for 79, 2 touchdowns week 15 against the Chargers. I mean, there's a range of outcomes where like he does that. Wouldn't surprise me overall. And then we get into like the weird stuff. So like remember Tyler Lockett's going to hit 32 this year. I had to move Adam Thielen down. I didn't realize he's going to be 34 this year. Even though I think that the Panthers are going to be able to use him as a security blanket as they try and develop what's his face, Bryce Young, and they're bringing in Deontay Johnson to kind of be that like target hog. I'm probably going to end up moving Deontay Johnson down if they bring in a wide receiver. I can't see how they don't spend on something to fix throwing away their draft pick on Bryce Young. Brandon Cooks is going to be 31 this year. I think he's relatively capped to what he's done the last 2 years, 700 yards. Probably going to get negative regression on touchdowns. Yeah, like it's just going to be how it goes. So like deeper leagues, I don't think there's going to be much upside to get back into that wide receiver 2 type range. Demarcus Robinson did have that 4-game stretch where he scored touchdowns week 13 through week 16 and did finish week 17 with 10 targets, 6 receptions, 92 yards. So age-related decline of Cooper Kupp, and he's the beneficiary as wide receiver 2 in that offense. Could happen, could see it happening. And then Jacoby Myers to finish this off. So 106 targets, 71 receptions, 800 yards, really, really close to what he did in 2022 and 2021 overall. Like the very similar stat lines, probably going to get negative regression on those touchdowns, maybe better quarterback play. But again, like you're looking at getting a mid-level wide or okay fringe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, and I have him ranked like all the way down at God. Like I don't even have him ranked at this point, but again, like the road to win your league with Jacoby Myers, unless you're in like really deep leagues, like it's just something to talk about. Even moving on to Josh Downs, like he would have to cannibalize Michael Pittman, Anthony Richardson would have to take a step forward. Really wasn't you or was kind of using that vertical role in this offense, like high targets, 17 games, could take the step forward. Something to talk about, like to be looking at overall draftability. Probably not going to be drafted in most leagues. Guys that could be picked up on waivers wire later on. Jahan Dotson's got a road to finish as wide receiver 1 attached to say like Drake May. It's something to talk about. I don't know. The 2 guys, Dontarian Wicks and Bo Melton, attached to the Packers. Maybe somebody with the Packers gets moved this offseason. Bo Melton did have these 2 stat lines to finish the year, touchdown in the playoffs. Could be the number 3 out of Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed, 2nd round pick. Bo Melton, I think he was like a 6th round draft pick with the Seattle Seahawks, and then he was released, picked up by the Packers. Dontavian Wicks with the snap share as the season goes on, went going up and down. 72% snaps that last game of season, 2 touchdowns. Big body X. If Romeo Doubs gets shipped, I could see him moving into that type of role. These are guys to be paying attention to in the offseason. And again, any guy who finishes as wide receiver 1 for his or has the opportunity to be wide receiver 1 in his offense, KJ Osborne goes to New England. 1 year, $4 million contract, like deep dark throw. Probably get a bet that Hunter Henry's the number 1 in the offense right now. Who knows who the quarterback's going to be overall, but like this would be a guy to be looking at. And then finally, I wouldn't even look at Mike Williams right now. It says he's not going to be ready for training camp. If there's news that he's healthy at his age, maybe he can sneak into wide receiver 2 land attached to Aaron Rodgers. Who knows? Guys to be paying attention to going on. So I did say that I would be talking about the rookies again. And like one of the things I would say about like Malik Neighbors, like you see that he didn't even test his arm length. Like they're selling each other to they're selling their draft positions. They're not going to give a bad number away. That means that like he knows that he's got short arms. He's not going to be a guy that gets up on the line of scrimmage and bullies. I said I'd talk a little bit more about Chris Olave, and this is the same thing with Chris Olave. Like gets bullied at the line of scrimmage, gets bullied in his routes. So I could definitely see those guys that are limited, if they get put in a very bad spot and they can get, have to, they're expected to play better than their weaknesses, as opposed to going into situations where they get to play towards their strength. So if he goes to the Chargers at 5 and he's got Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer, who Palmer can operate as that number 2, Quentin Johnston could be that big guy to draw coverage, and they can move neighbors around, like attached to Justin Herbert with with his skill set, that sub 4.40, and that quickness, like that would be something that really interesting, that would propel him into potentially having that like high upside outcome. Like Rome going to the Chargers would be really interesting, but Rome going to the Giants with Danny Dimes and that wide receiver core, like that's just not something I'd be interested in. Looking at some of the other guys, like I like these wide receivers. I talked about these guys yesterday. Their landing spot, as I hit whatever I hit, their landing spot is going to be like really odd, because like again, asking some guys like AD Mitchell to go do what he needs to do, and be the number 1 in the offense, he's still going to be a little raw. Like I just like, you're looking at like an 800-yard rookie year, and I just don't think that moves the needle. They go to the right spot, and they have guys to protect them, and maybe you're looking at the upside to maximize that. I do like Brian Thomas. Again, he's another like big guy with speed, and again, like it's just going to be where they go and trying to guess it. So like right now, I was looking at Neighbors, and I do really think that he's going to end up going to the Chargers at 5, because that just makes sense to me at this point. That would move him up. Marvin Harrison would be a fringe top 10 guy. Neighbors could potentially be a top 10 guy, based off that. Like after that, like where Rome goes, like the Giants, I wouldn't be interested in. I was seeing some things about Brock Bowers going 10 to the Jets. Maybe the Raiders I could maybe see the Raiders bringing in like Rome to replace what you call it, Devontae Adams. Who knows what the Broncos are going to do? They got to bring in a quarterback. So trying to guess where some of these guys are going to land is probably not worth it. And some of these guys that are, like I was talking about yesterday, with Ladd McConkey and Ricky Pearsall, like those slots are going to move in and probably have more value than trying to guess where some of these other big body guys are going to go, and they're going to have like less opportunities. So anyway, that's about all I got. Hopefully I will get the tight end videos out next week, and the week after that, the quarterbacks, and then we're to the draft, and there we go.